What's up, guys? Adam with Whisker Fisherman TV. Today I'm going to do a video on my top 6 catfish baits. Now these are all proven baits, guys. They're not all baits that I'm going to recommend you use all the time, but they all do catch fish. And sometimes some of these are available when something like cut bait can be a little bit harder to come by. I'm not going to get super in depth with each and every individual bait, and some of these require a recipe. Just going to kind of go over how often I use them, when I use them, and basically how good of a bait I really think they are. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and jump right in with number 1. And that's going to be live bait. Hey guys, my number 1 catfish bait, live bait. Nothing catches large fish more consistently, and you don't really have to worry about the smaller fish going after your bait so much. The biggest downfall with this, it can be a little hard to get, especially in the winter time. But as soon as spring hits, this is usually one of the first things I start trying to gather up. Number 2, guys, cut bait. These are cut up chubs and sunnies, which are probably my favorite 2 fish to use. Most people I've seen who fish the really large rivers, with 80-pound fish, tend to use much larger pieces. They tend to use, a shad that's 12 inches long, it seems like to me. Around here, majority of fish are a little bit smaller, so I tend to use smaller pieces. And they really do go after this really well. I think cut bait is probably my favorite bait. The only reason it's not at the number 1 spot is I do feel that live bait does attract larger fish, just on a whole. But cut bait, I can, put it in my freezer, kind of forget about it. I know it's better if it's fresh, but sometimes it's just not practical for me to go out and spend an hour catching bait every time I want to go catfishing. So cut bait is my standby. It's easy to cast, guys. You can kind of cut these up in certain ways, and you can launch these things as far as you're capable of casting, and it stays on the hook like a champ. All catfish hit it. The flatheads tend to prefer the live bait, but I don't catch as many of those, so cut bait is probably my number 1 bait. This is the one that I use, honestly, probably more than all these other baits combined for the rest of this list. If you're not using this, guys, you need to be trying it, because this is the difference between catching 2-pound fish and 20-pound fish. Number 3 on our list, livers. Now these are just regular chicken livers from the grocery store. I actually prefer squirrel livers, rabbit livers, groundhog livers, things like that, but these are under $2 for a pretty decent size carton of them. And I'll say, guys, this is a proven bait. Really the only major drawback with it is it tends not to want to stay on the hook too well. Now there are a lot of ways that you can get this to stay on your hook. Usually I don't modify mine at all. I will take a little bit of thread and wrap it around it if I feel like I need to. But it's actually pretty seldom that I will use this by itself. I almost always use this with cut bait, or this with stink bait, any other kind of bait. Just something that I can cast out a little bit, and then I usually leave this pretty close to shore. It's a proven bait. It doesn't seem to catch as many large fish in the rivers. It works like a champ in ponds. I think a lot of the reason it doesn't seem to work as well in rivers for the big fish is it's just not putting out that scent like it does in a pond. It tends to get washed out fairly quick and comes off your hook fairly easily if another small catfish hits on it. But it's a proven bait. You can get it any time of the year, relatively inexpensive. And if you're like me and it's pretty seldom I can use one of those whole cartons while I'm fishing. So first thing I do is bring mine home and just separate it out into baggies. What I'm taking fishing with me, I put in the refrigerator. What I'm not, I put in the freezer. And it works pretty well out of the freezer. I have heard people who swear by fresh liver. Just in my experience, it does not seem to make much of a difference. Number 4, stink bait. Now, I'll be honest with you, this is kind of a hit or miss bait, guys. There are times where they do seem to like what you're throwing at them, and there are times where you can throw that out there and they just don't seem to pay any attention to it. In general, I prefer this for spring. I will make it occasionally in the summertime, and I tend to do that. I throw this a lot like I would livers, except I can cast this out. That's basically the main reason that I use stink bait, is because I can cast it, whereas livers, again, unless you modify them, you will have a problem with them staying on the hook. This stuff is my homemade. I put a video out quite a while ago called Small Batch Stink Bait. I have altered this recipe a little bit since then, so I might do an updated version of that. But most of these recipes tend to be the same. Cheese, blood, things like that, just garlic powder. A lot of people like to use Jello, Kool-Aid, things like that. You're just putting out a pretty heavy scent. That, again, I've had more luck on smaller fish with this. It's very seldom that a large one will hit it. But it's something I can make at home in half an hour and put it in my refrigerator or my freezer, and I just grab it when I'm running a little low on cut bait or live bait. Again, it's good bait, guys. It's just the reason it's so low on the list, and it a lot of times will be on the bottom of some of the other lists that you're going to watch, is because it's just not as effective as most of the other baits on this list. It's not going to work as well as livers, and it's not going to work as well as cut bait. But it is an effective bait that you can throw out there occasionally. Alright, moving right along, guys. Number 5, Jello baits. Now, there are different recipes for these. It's all pretty much the same. This is a mixed bag of both chicken and Jello. But probably the most basic recipe is to simply take a hot dog, slice it up into some about mouth-sized chunks. Nothing too big, nothing too small. And pour a bag of Jello in there, or a little bit out of a box of Jello, I should say. And it works okay. Honestly, this is the least effective bait on this list. The only reason that I use this is just because of how easy it is to have a pack of hot dogs and a pack of Jello around the house. It works occasionally. I mean, there have been times where I've thrown this out and I might get 2 fish when I'm confident. If I'd had almost any of the other baits, I probably would have got 4 or 5, if not more. But it's readily accessible, and it's never something I would never go fishing with just this unless I absolutely had to. Generally what I do with this, if it's the winter time and I'm fishing a small creek or something, this will work okay. Or if it's the winter time and I am fishing the river, I will throw this on one of my rods and then run cut bait on the other rods, just to make sure that I do have a bait in the water. Again, guys, it's the ease of use is the main reason that I even have this on the list. It doesn't rot the way livers will. It doesn't stink the way stink bait does. It's not messy like either of those things. And it's, you know, really, again, it's really probably far and away the cleanest bait on this list, other than maybe live bait, depending on what kind of fish you're using. And it's just easy to keep around the house. Again, all these recipes are pretty much the same in general. It's hot dogs and or chicken with some jello and some garlic powder. Again, not that effective, but it's something to keep in your arsenal in case you do need it. This might be the difference between running 1 rod and 3 rods. Last but certainly not least, guys, worms. Good old worms, guys. There are 2 drawbacks to these, and that is the reason that these are not number 3 on the list. Okay, the number 1 drawback is going to be price. If you're buying these at your local gas station, they do get a little pricey. Now, of course, you know, I have a video out on just going out and picking these, you know, without anything other than a coffee can, in which case they're free. And the only other drawback is that every fish loves worms. That doesn't sound like a problem, but it can get to be a problem, especially during the daytime. At nighttime, you don't seem to have as much a problem with it, but it's pretty rare I will even take worms to the river, simply because it's too easy for small fish to pick my bait off and I'm sitting there without any bait on my hook. That being said, I'm not sure how I would make it through a summer without fishing with worms at least sometimes. There is simply no other bait that I'm really aware of that I can throw out into a creek and catch every kind of fish in that creek. Even fish, you know, occasionally something like carp will hit worms. I don't go after them with worms, but occasionally they will hit it. Which I've never had that happen with something like stink bait or live bait. It's just never happened. My number 1 use for these is not catfishing, it is bait fishing. This tends to be what I use to catch the fish that I'm going to use while I'm fishing for the larger fish. But the summertime, especially if it's just one of those days you wake up, hey, I want to go. Maybe you're not like me and you can't have a tub of bait just sitting in the freezer and a live well with, you know, a little bit of live bait in it. There's just no more effective way and time efficient way, in my opinion, to catch fish. If it wasn't for the fact that other fish love these so much, this would probably be the number 1 catfish bait. But again, I'm not really out to catch, you know, a 1-pound bass when I'm fishing for 10-pound catfish. 8 pounds, hell yeah, that's a good fish.